Hello, everyone. This video lecture is going to pertain to an article that was written by H.G. Wells entitled The Limits of Individual Plasticity. As you've learned from that first video lecture on H.G. Wells, the author of the chapter that you had to read for this week was also a biologist and a zoologist who had trained under Huxley. As a consequence of his familiarity with the physical sciences, H.G. Wells produced a number of scientific articles and also almost popular science journal articles of his day, arguing for certain positions to be adopted by society based on his understanding of zoology and biology. One of these articles became really the basis for Dr. Moreau's defense of his actions and his explanation of his techniques. That being The Limits of Individual Plasticity, this article that H.G. Wells had written. As we go through this text and I highlight certain portions thereof, you're going to see direct parallels and, in fact, even direct quotations from this article that appear in Dr. Moreau's defense. So, in many ways, H.G. Wells is using Dr. Moreau as a mouthpiece for his own philosophical and political points of view that are predicated on his understanding of what he terms the plasticity of human beings and plasticity of animals more generally. Now, plasticity is a kind of evolutionary biological term that means the ability of a creature or a species to adapt to its environment. So a creature, or rather a species of creatures, that is particularly plastic means that they have this capacity innately to adapt themselves to a wide variety of different environments and circumstances. So there's almost like a greater potential for branching off into other forms. They're not overly specialized to survive only in one environment, and thus cannot branch out and have this plastic, malleable nature to their biology and to their potential future evolution. What we see here in H.G. Wells' exploration of the plasticity of species is really the groundwork for his philosophical presumptions that underlie Dr. Moreau's arguments. What Dr. Moreau is saying, really, is a parallel to, he serves as a mouthpiece for H.G. Wells and his own views. I'm going to read through this article by H.G. Wells that will also be posted in the Distributed Documents tab on Omnivox, and I'll highlight certain key details that are germane to our understanding of H.G. Wells and the argument that's being made through Dr. Moreau. The generalizations of heredity may be pushed to extremes, to an almost fanatical fatalism. There are excellent people who have elevated systematic breeding into a creed and adorned it with a propaganda. The hereditary tendency plays in modern romance the part of the malignant fairy, and its victims drive through life blighted from the very beginning. It often seems to be tacitly assumed that a living thing is at the utmost nothing more than the complete realization of its birth possibilities, and so heredity becomes confused with theological predestination. In other words, H.G. Wells is saying here that our genetics, our inheritance from our parents, seems oftentimes in popular thought and in fiction to be like this demonic specter from which you can never escape. Everyone is so overdetermined and constrained by their biology that they can never become anything more than the sum total of the possibilities that existed in their genetics. But after all, the birth tendencies are only one set of factors in the making of a living creature. We overlook only too often the fact that a living being may also be regarded as raw material, as something plastic, something that may be shaped and altered, that this possibly may be added and that eliminated, and the organism as a whole developed far beyond its apparent possibilities. We overlook this collateral factor, and so too much of our modern morality becomes mere subservience to natural selection, and we find it not only the discreetest but the wisest course to drive before the wind. So here he's saying that individuals, just like species, have a kind of plasticity to them. They're not wholly limited by their genetic predispositions. There may be ways in which we can imply our knowledge of the sciences, our knowledge of biology, the functions of the human organism or animal organisms, in order to modify them. That there exists within them this plasticity, this ability to be shaped and redefined, not just on the evolutionary level, which is sort of like the context in which H.G. Wells is discussing this, but here on the individual level, we can take this almost tabula rasa lump of clay and reform it, reshape it into something that meets our own needs and our own desires. What is the true limitation of the plasticity of an individual creature that's been shaped by evolution and now may be taken as a creature and reshaped by the execution of our surgical techniques, our minds, our genetic engineering, and whatnot? Now, the suggestion this little article would advance is this: that there is in science, and perhaps even more so in history, some sanction for the belief that a living thing might be taken in hand and so molded and modified that at best it would retain scarcely anything of its inherent form and disposition, that the thread of life might be preserved unimpaired, while shape and mental superstructure were so extensively recast as even to justify our regarding the result as a new variety of being. That's an extensive thesis, but Wells is simply saying that my argument is that it is possible to take a living creature and, through the application of scientific processes, transform it so fundamentally as to render it almost unrecognizable from the original form from whence it derived. Maybe we can take this creature and turn it into something unrecognizably different, molded, shaped because of its inherent plasticity, its ability to be molded and shaped, into something that is, well, suited to our needs or our purposes. This proposition is purposely stated here in its barest and most startling form. It is not asserted that the changes effected would change in any way the offspring of such a creature, but only that the creature itself as an individual is capable of such recasting. And that, in fact, is part and parcel of Dr. Moreau's experiments in the context of the island of Dr. Moreau. Dr. Moreau is able to reshape animals into the form of human beings, although the totality of humanity escapes him. Yet, the offspring of these creatures are wholly animalistic. So when Moreau takes them, he brings them into the House of Pain and reshapes the offspring as well. The rest of this article ranges through a variety of different examples of the ways in which surgical procedures can be used to modify and alter human flesh and animal flesh, and the way in which various different kinds of non-scientific approaches have been used to create hideous monstrosities, amalgamated animals, hunters, cockspurs, mountebanks, misshapen monstrosities or abominations, as he puts it, these monsters manufactured. And that is, in fact, from whence the title of this course derives: monster making or monsters manufactured. Monsters propagated and amalgamated from the imagination and the application of scientific techniques in Moreau's and Wells' perspective, or the use of artifice, the application of the human reason and mind to capture and to create monstrosity. These various different techniques, such as the use of amputation, tongue cutting, and surgical removal of a squint, the excision of organs, the grafting of fleshy material from one animal to another. All of these are listed directly, almost lifted verbatim from this article by Dr. Moreau in his defense of his procedures. Wells concludes his article by saying, "We have said enough to develop this curious proposition. It may be the set limits of structure and physical capacity are narrower than are here supposed, so perhaps creatures and individuals are not as plastic as I have suggested. But, as the case stands, this artistic treatment of living things, this molding of the commonplace individual into the beautiful or the grotesque, certainly seems to be so far credible as to merit a place in our minds among the things that may someday be." So we might not have the understanding of the circadian rhythms of the human body, the interactions between organelles, and the operation of the electrochemical systems in the brain as to affect these kinds of transformations. But perhaps one day, our understanding of the universe will have advanced to such a point that these will not be the province of science fiction, but that we may be able to create these things in accordance with our own will. And the underlying moral dictates of H.G. Wells' philosophy, his strident atheism, his belief that there is no ultimate purpose or goal or nature to things, some kind of prescription as to how things should operate and the purpose that they were created for, comes to the forefront. As he says, this artistic treatment of living things, we can treat individual living things as nothing more than a canvas on which to present the artistry of our techniques, to reshape it, to mold it like clay into some kind of beautiful or grotesque statuette, a testament to our skill and our knowledge, our understanding of the craftsman's work of biology, zoology, and all the sciences that are involved in reshaping animal tissue. The end goal thereof is not stated. Like Moreau, Wells doesn't seem to have a purpose in mind. It's equally valid for him to use these techniques, or the techniques that he can envision, to create something beautiful as it is to render something grotesque. It's whatever inclination, fancy, desire should strike us at the moment. There is no end goal. It's merely the end goal that we can imagine subjectively, the purpose that we envision for the particular techniques that we're going to employ. In the same way, Dr. Moreau selected the template of humanity for his creations simply on a whim. There is no real end goal to those experiments. It's just a testing of the limitations of his abilities, a refinement of the techniques. Like a painter or an artist who doesn't recognize beauty as really existing. It's all just a construct, a fantasy, a vision that we construct for ourselves. Doesn't really mean anything. Think back to H.P. Lovecraft and his philosophy of cosmicism that we referenced. He didn't believe that there was any such thing as purpose, meaning, goodness, beauty. All of these things were just comforting lies that we invented for ourselves. Here, Moreau and Wells alike evidence the same kind of perspective on the universe, in that there is no end goal. Whether we create something that is subjectively, personally beautiful, or something that is grotesque, it's only based on our own suppositions, our own subjective beliefs about what is beautiful and what is grotesque that could change over time, that could be different for different peoples or different cultures. And in the end, whether we make something beautiful or whether we make something grotesque, the end goal is meaningless. It's not about making something beautiful. It's not about making something grotesque. It's about the artistic treatment of living things. Really, just a test of how far we can press our understanding and refine our techniques.